Alright, what is up guys? It's Thompson or Randomania11 and I am here bringing you today a Pokemon X and Y Wi-Fi battle. Now in today's battle we have an OU battle against Steven, otherwise known as Saint Raven 93 on Twitch. It was a pretty good battle actually. I had this a couple of weeks ago, so sorry if I do sound a bit rusty with the narration and I haven't done much X and Y Wi-Fi battle narration, so we'll see how it goes. Anyway, looking at the teams, this is the Volt Turn Regenerator core team that I used in my last battle. Whereas Steven is looking like he's using a very powerful OU team with a bit of bird spam there. Looking at his team, that Staraptor will be very threatening to my team if it does manage to take out my Rotom, just because of that reckless Brave Bird and Double Edge doing some serious damage, and that if that is a Mega Venusaur, which I assume it is since it's his only potential Mega on Steven's team, if my Tornadus does go down or get put to sleep, then it could potentially pose a bit of a threat to my team. Having said that, I know that my Tornadus is going to be one of the best Pokemon against his team, just for taking out that Mega Venusaur, as well as just getting a bit of the momentum with the Regenerator. And I also need to keep my Amoonguss and at least Rotom around just to check some of his other attackers. So with that, let's get right into the battle. Okay, so starting off, I decide to lead with my Mega Manectric, knowing that it can go up pretty well against anything that he decides to lead off against, while my opponent decides to lead off with his Papa Bird, his Staraptor, which, like I said, is pretty threatening to my team. So knowing that when I do get my Mega Evolution up, I will have the Intimidate, meaning that it will be at -1 attack, I'm hoping that I should be able to take any attack that my opponent's Staraptor wants to go for. And he does go for that, what would be a Choice Scarf, Reckless Double Edge, doing a serious amount of damage to my Manectric and outspeeding it. But I am able to retaliate and KO it with the Volt Switch straight away, but I am now at a low amount of HP. So I am able to bring in my Tornadus on the next turn, getting some of the Regenerator U-turn core going, as my opponent brings in the Rotom Wash. Now, I can't really do anything to the Rotom, so I do decide to just U-turn out of there and go into my special defensive wall, my Amoonguss, knowing that I could take anything that it wants to go for and isn't really troubled by any status move or anything. So my opponent does go for the Will-O-Wisp, which would have probably crippled my Tornadus, at least its physical moves. And on the next turn, my opponent can't do anything else to my Amoonguss, so they just go for the Volt Switch, getting straight out of there. Now here, I just decided to go straight for the Spore, knowing that I could cripple anything except for his Mega Venusaur, and potentially putting it out of the match for the rest of the game. Now my opponent decides to go into his Excadrill, and I'm really happy that I was able to catch that with the Spore, meaning it's going to be slightly less threatening throughout the match. Now, having seen that I have put his Pokemon to sleep, my opponent does decide to go out into his Tossed Salad, his Mega Venusaur. And like I said, this is going to be a major problem to most of my team, just if I lose my Tornadus T. So I decide to go out into my Slowbro, predicting that my opponent would have gone out into his Talonflame, and it doesn't really work out all that well for me. So my opponent then goes for the Mega Evolution as I switch out into my Scizor, knowing that I should be able to take any hit unless he is carrying the HP Fire, which isn't all that common, but I was still a bit hesitant. And my opponent does go for the Sludge Bomb, which of course Scizor is immune to. Now here on the next turn, I am unfortunately put to sleep by the Sleep Powder, meaning that Scizor won't be able to do much for the rest of the match, which kind of, yeah, is a bit disappointing. Now my opponent is going to switch out now that Scizor is asleep, as I also switch out, and my opponent goes out into his Starmie while I decide to go out into my Tornadus T. Now my Tornadus isn't running max speed, but it is running enough to outspeed, I think, Choice Scarf Tyranitar, which means that it will outspeed this Starmie, and I am able to get a massive amount of damage off on it with the knockoff, getting rid of its Life Orb, and that Ice Beam without the Life Orb will not be doing a lot of damage to me. So now I know that I can probably knock it out with a U-turn, or if my opponent decides to switch out, I do get a bit of momentum. So I do go for that U-turn as my opponent once again goes out into the Rotom Wash, which can severely wall my Tornadus T at the moment. And then once again I go straight back out into my Amoonguss, knowing that my opponent can't do much to me with the Rotom. So once again my opponent just Volt Switches out on my Amoonguss, gets a critical hit, but it doesn't really matter that much in the long run. So right here I went for the Giga Drain on the Rotom Wash, hopefully, but my opponent does make a good switch out into his Talonflame, which is going to take nothing from that, and I unfortunately can do very little against this Talonflame. So obviously, predicting my switch out this turn, my opponent is able to go for a U-turn on my Rotom Wash, which, because this is a physically defensive Rotom Wash, doesn't do a lot, but it is going to give him a free switch out into his Mega Venusaur, which, like we saw with my Amoonguss against his Rotom Wash, I can't really do much against him. So knowing that, I decide to go straight out into my Tornadus T as he goes for the Giga Drain. And because this is a Assault Vest and resisted, that's not going to do anything at all to my Tornadus T. And right here, I just decide to go for the Hurricane, hoping to get some serious damage off against whatever he wants to switch in, or potentially KOing the Mega Venusaur if he decides to stay in. So knowing that my opponent really wants to get rid of this Tornadus T, I just decide to go for the U-turn against the Rotom Wash, because I can't really do anything against it, like I said. And I just go straight out into my Amoonguss, as my opponent goes for the Will-O-Wisp, which is a good switch, because Amoonguss is obviously already burnt. So my opponent once again Volt Switches out of there, isn't able to touch my Amoonguss. And so predicting his switch into something that'll obviously be able to take my hits, I decide to go for the Clear Smog, which is the only move that I can at least hit neutrally against this Talonflame. It does decentish damage, I guess. So I'm able to get a little bit more damage off against it, but once again, this Talonflame is very threatening with the Brave Bird. So I decide to switch out here, go into my Manectric, hopefully being able to survive whatever hit he goes for with the Intimidate, and hopefully resisting the Brave Bird, which my opponent does go for, but it turns out that this is likely a Choice Banded Talonflame and is easily able to knock me out in one hit, which means down goes my Manectric and one part of my U-turn core. So knowing that he's now locked himself into the Brave Bird, I decide to go into Rotom Wash, which will be able to resist that, and KO with either Hydro Pump or Volt Switch. So I do decide to go on this turn straight for the Volt Switch, as my opponent switches out into the Excadrill, which is a very good switch. Now in the next turn I try to go for the Hydro Pump, but it unfortunately misses, which means that my opponent is able to waste one turn of sleep there for my miss. Now predicting that my opponent will switch out, not wanting to take a Hydro Pump on the next turn, I go straight for the Volt Switch as my opponent does switch out into their Mega Venusaur, allowing me to get a bit of momentum here and switch into my Tornadus, hopefully able to now knock out this Mega Venusaur, as on the next turn I do with a critical hit Hurricane. I don't know how much that matters, but considering it is a Mega Venusaur and I'm not fully invested in special attack, I'd say that it does matter a bit. Now, because I was able to get the free switch into that Mega Venusaur, my opponent's Choice Banded Brave Bird from their Talonflame unfortunately isn't quite able to knock my Tornadus out. I'm able to live on 9 HP and retaliate with the knockoff, getting rid of their Choice Band and knocking him out in the one hit. Now my opponent's free to bring in his Rotom Wash, but I still have a bit of use for this Tornadus T I predict in the match, So I do just decide to Volt Switch out of there, U-turn out of there and go into my Amoonguss to take on this Rotom Wash. Now, it turns out that this Rotom Wash is a Resto Chesto one like mine that I'm running, so he is able to go for the rest, recover all of his HP back, and then wake up straight away with his Lumberry, which means that this Rotom Wash will be a bit of an extra pain to take out later on in the match. So next my opponent decides to go for the Volt Switch with his Rotom Wash, just getting straight out of there from my Amoonguss, and he decides to go into his Revolver, his Excadrill, as I'm just going to go straight for the Giga Drain, and it does very little against his Excadrill. So not really wanting to take anything from this Excadrill, even if he does wake up, I do decide to switch out and go into my physically defensive wall, my Slowbro, to take whatever he wants to go for. But it does turn out that my opponent is going to get the 3-turn sleep from the Spore, which means on the next turn they are going to wake up. It's going to go for the Shadow Claw, which does a decent amount of damage, I guess, to my Slowbro. Not quite a 3-hit KO, I don't think, after Leftovers. And I am able to retaliate with the Scald, and I do, unfortunately for my opponent, get the first turn burn. So this Excadrill is significantly less threatening now that it is burnt, and unfortunately for my opponent, he is going to be unable to break through my Slowbro, as I just decide to go for the Psyshock, predicting the switch out into the Rotom Wash. But turns out that the burn's going to finish my opponent off in the next turn or two anyway. So on the next turn, I just decide to switch out, go into my other physically defensive wall, my Rotom Wash, just to take the Shadow Claw, knowing that it will be even less effective against it because it's not super effective, like it was against the Slowbro. And my opponent is now going to go down to the burn, which means that he only has his Starmie left with very little amount of HP, as well as his own Rotom Wash. Now my opponent is going to go for the Thunderbolt against my Rotom, and because it no longer has its Life Orb, it's not going to do all that much against my Rotom, giving me plenty of opportunity to go for the Volt Switch, KO the Starmie, and switch right out into my Amoonguss, ready to take on the Rotom Wash. So with only his Rotom Wash left, and I have all 5 of my Pokemon left, apart from Mega Manectric, I am easily going to be able to outstall this Rotom Wash. He's going to go for the Hydro Pump. Doesn't do all that much damage to my Amoonguss, as I'm able to retaliate with the Giga Drain, and at this point I'm going to be easily able to outstall him with my Amoonguss, heal off the damage with Giga Drain, and eventually beat this Rotom Wash. So we decided to call it a match there. I hope you guys all enjoyed this battle. It was really fun. I really enjoyed getting back into this competitive side, and I want to bring some more of these battles to you guys in the future. So if you did like it, go ahead and smash the hell out of that like button. Go ahead, subscribe to the channel, and I will be bringing some more of these Pokemon X and Y, and eventually Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire Wi-Fi battles to you guys. Thanks.